1, 2, 3. Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my hobby channel. Following on from my previous video where I did an unboxing of this particular starter army and a comparison of miniature sizes with some Empire models from Games Workshop, I'm now expanding the scope of my size comparisons and looking at some miniatures from other manufacturers. Before I get started, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has been watching, liking and commenting on my previous videos, and also to the people who very kindly pointed out that I was mispronouncing this word here. And thank you for doing it without bruising my ego. Curious to find out how I should be pronouncing that word, I jumped onto Google and did a search and found half a dozen videos that all pronounced it differently. So apologies to my German friends and German listeners for inadvertently abusing your language. I think I've now found the correct pronunciation for this, and it is Landsknecht. Landsknecht. So hopefully now in all my future videos I will break the habit of a lifetime and pronounce that word correctly. Continuing with the theme of my previous video, I wanted to take a look at some Perry miniatures. Now I've got a couple of boxes here of War of the Roses and European infantry. I'm not going to do an unboxing of these because I have covered them in previous videos way back when, and I will be revisiting them again soon. But the reason I've included them is because I have a unit of Perry miniatures here, mercenary handgunners, which I built a few years ago when I was writing this book on fantasy figure modeling. And it was following on from a couple of comments that were left on my previous video that the penny finally dropped, and I remembered that not only did I have a handful of Perry miniatures in my collection, but also buried somewhere I had several blisters of Foundry miniatures, some of which would be appropriate for Empire. So I had a little route through my stash and I found a blister of Mercenary Command, and then another blister of Mercenary Command, and a blister of Mercenary Handgunners. Now I didn't have time to feature all of those miniatures in my book when I was writing it, and I always planned to do some kind of video where I would take these miniatures, base them up, paint them and include them in an army. And it was whilst I was rummaging through my collection looking for old Perry miniatures and Foundry miniatures that I stumbled across these. A Marauder Ogre. Some of which I think have just been re-released as part of Warhammer the Old World. I also found this miniature when Games Workshop released a range of miniatures for the Talisman game. I think this might be one of them. And I also think that this would make an excellent character to have standing in the front ranks of one of my units. So I thought I'd begin by taking a quick look at this unit of Perry mercenary handgunners. I am actually basing these for never mind the bill hooks or black powder. So although I need to tidy up the paint job on these figures and maybe add a little bit of extra highlighting, which could be a challenge now that I've actually glued them down, these were originally painted as proxy Empire handgunners. And as I said before, I did feature them inside my modelling and painting fantasy figures book, which is still available to buy if you wish. And as you can see from this image on page 17, these miniatures were originally glued to 20 by 20 mil square bases. But since then, I have repurposed them on these larger bases. And it was whilst digging out the Perry miniatures that I also remembered that I'd got these miniatures from Foundry Wargames. Now, due to editorial constraints, I wasn't able to paint these miniatures in a step-by-step guide, but I did include them in the section on applying a zenithal prime. And that's when I realised that these three miniatures had been part of a blister, and I had several blisters that were untouched. And I thought it would be a shame not to do anything with these miniatures. So with that in mind, I'm going to crack open a couple of these blisters blasters, take a look at what's inside, and then do a scale comparison with some Games Workshop Warhammer the Old World models and these Landsknechts from Warlord. Okay, so I can't do a scale comparison if I don't have any miniatures. So last night, after deleting some comments left by haters on my channel, I sat down in front of Netflix and built these miniatures here. And the first two miniatures I want to look at are these two here. We've got the Landsknecht pikeman on the left that I built in the previous video, and on the right we've got a Perry mercenary from their European infantry of 1450 to 1500. And this I have given a head from the Conquistadors from Wargames Atlantic and some spare feathers from the Landsknecht starter army from Warlord. So if we take a closer look at this Perry miniature with the Conquistador's head, the only real issue I found was the fact that the Wargames Atlantic heads have flat necks. And on some models it might be necessary to build the neck up a little, perhaps with a ball of green stuff and a tiny bit of super glue. On this model I didn't bother, I felt that I could get away with it. And so I've just stuck the head onto a Perry body and just finished off with a couple of feathers from the Landsknecht starter army by Warlord. Now the Perry pikeman on the right is holding a pike that is slightly longer than the pike from Warlord, but because it's being gripped the way that it is and is almost touching the ground, height-wise they tend to finish in round about the same place. Obviously if you are making an Empire army, you're going to want Halberdiers and Spearmen. And if you're making a historical army, you might want some Renaissance or Landsknecht Halberdiers as well. And here are three that I made yesterday. Just turn that one round so that you can see. He is in fact carrying a halberd. So the one on the left is made using a Warlord body and a Warlord head with Perry arms. The one in the middle is a Warlord Landsknecht pikeman with the tip of the pike snipped off, and the one on the right is another Warlord Landsknecht pikeman with the pike shortened to make a spear, and I'm now going to show you how I did that. The conversion itself is a little bit fiddly but fairly straightforward, and it's following these suggestions or the instructions that are on the back of the European mercenaries from Perry miniatures. So if we take a quick look at those instructions there, you can see in this diagram that the kit comes with some poleaxe or halberdier heads, and there's a dotted line there that basically tells you what height the polearm needs to be. So it involves cutting the pike down to the correct height so that you can glue the axe head to the top of the polearm. And that's basically what I did using this sprue from the mercenary box set. Now you get two of these sprues in with those troops, and there are 6 billhook or poleaxe or bladed options there for turning the longer pikes into polearms. So I had several of these left over in my bits box. And instead of using Perry miniatures to make pole arms, I trimmed down the pike on a Warlord Landsknecht and glued the blade to the top of that model. So ignoring the head for the moment, I've got the parts that I need to turn this Warlord pikeman into a figure like this carrying a polearm. When turning the pike into a polearm, I wanted to make sure that I trimmed it to the correct length, so I'm using another figure here that I've kitbashed with some Perry parts as a scale reference. And what I've done is I've compared the length that I need Now I've already scored a line. The camera may not pick it up, but I've already scored a line there where I need to trim that pike. So that's what I'm going to do first. Now the top of the pike that I've trimmed off here needs to be put to one side for safekeeping, because we will be using that later. Okay, so I'll go with this one on the end here. Trim that off. And you just need to make sure that when you've cut it there, that it is level, it's not slanted or anything. And the same applies for the end of the pike that you've just trimmed down. Make sure that you've cut it at right angles to the edge of the pike so that it's not slanted in any way. Creaky floorboards. Okay, so I'm going to get a dab of glue on there, but you want the plastic to start melting fairly quickly. And then I'm just going to see if I can lay it on this piece of polythene here to dry. That's not going to work. Try again with some glass this time. So, bit of glue on there. It's fiddly and it's messy. That way. I'm going to let that dry and hope for the best. Whilst we wait for that polearm to dry, we want to turn our other landsknecht pikeman into a spearman like this. And for that we will need the spear tip that was left over from our halberd conversion. Okay, so if we take a look at this pike arm here, you can see that it's being carried at the base in that hand. Now I know some people like to swap out their plastic pikes for metal, brass or steel pikes. You could probably do that with this by carefully cutting away the entire plastic pike, so there's no need to drill anything out. Now we're making a spear, so we still want the hand holding the bottom of the spear, so we don't need to go that far. But I will be trimming this pike shaft right down to the top of the shoulder. So I just want to get the blade in there. So here is the pike that I've trimmed off, and we're going to save that for something else. So I'll put that to one side. You can see how I've trimmed the arm, hopefully. I've come down lower than the top of the shoulder, and that is to give us a bigger surface area on which to glue the spear point, the top of the spear. So if I bring the pike back in that we've just cut off, as I said, I'm saving that for something special. And the top of the pike that was trimmed off when we made the halberd, as you can see, is slightly shorter. So rather than waste a nice long plastic spear that's here, I'm taking the shorter piece to make the spear for this arm. So returning to my model that I made yesterday, I want to get a spear that's about the same size. And if we zoom in and I line up the bottom of the arm, oops, bit fiddly this, but you can see roughly how much I need to lose. Now, I'm not bothered about being mathematically precise here. I'll judge it by eye. Line up the top of the spear points, line up the bottom of the arm, and it's about 1/2 centimetre that needs to come off the bottom of that spear point. So move him out of the way. Hold that spear in place, bring the knife in and trim. And that offcut's just shot across the room, but we don't need it. All I need to do now is glue the top end of that spear in place. So I'm going to trim off a tiny bit there to sit against the arm. Put some glue on it. That's the floorboards. I've had to move my hobby room because noisy neighbours next door have meant my old hobby room was no longer suitable. And of course, I'm now in the back bedroom away from everyone. And whether it's the weight of metal on all the shelves, I don't know, but the floorboards creak like mad in here and it's a nightmare. I promise you it's not me. I have now glued the top end of the pike that we removed when we made the halberd to the bottom end of the pike shaft there, and I'm going to place that to dry on my bit of glass as well. So, and keep all the bits together to complete that conversion, which I'll do in a minute. I just wanted to say that if you're doing a unit of, 10 or 20 halberdiers and 10 or 20 spearmen, you could soon end up with 20 to 40 of these pikes or spears that are off-cut. So as long as you use the shorter spear that you cut from the halberdier to make the spear point on another pikeman, then the last bit of pike that you trim away from your soon-to-be spearman will be the longest piece, and you can collect these up and you can either use them to equip other units with spears, or you can take something like this gabion here and use them to create bits of scenery, objective markers, or whatever. So it's worth taking a little bit of extra time and a little bit of care over how you use the offcuts and the spare bits so that you get the most mileage out of all your kit bashing. So that's what I'll be doing. I will be trimming down a pike to make a halberdier, and that will leave me with a spear that's shorter than these. So I then trim down another pikeman and take the short spear point to make a spearman like this. And then, as I just said, I'll be collecting all these up, either to equip another unit with spears somewhere along the line, or to make nice little vignettes. So now I'm returning to the halberdier model. I'm going to glue on the arms. So just get that glued on there. And now I think I mentioned this earlier in the video, but I just want to try and show you there, the neck on the Wargames Atlantic Conquistadors is actually flat. So you may need to build that up if you're going to glue it to a Games Workshop Empire miniature or a Warlord miniature or a Perry miniature. I think the way this has worked out is actually quite good. I might need a bit more glue on there. So it lands in the right place. I like the way that looks. Okay, so now I'm going to put a feather just on the front there. Bit fiddly, but worth it. Just use a scalpel to nudge it. Really do like the way that has turned out. I hope you can see it okay. I do think that's a pretty cool conversion. Those parts go together really nicely. So that's using Perry, Wargames Atlantic and Warlord parts for that Kitbash. And I think a unit of those will look bang on. And I've just followed exactly the same process to make the Spearmen. In exactly the same way. Using a Warlord body and arms, the trimmed down pike or spear, and a Wargames Atlantic Conquistador cavalry head with a Warlord feather glued to it. And I hope you'll agree, they look pretty cool. So whether it's a historical army or it's an empire army, maybe you're making an Australian army, either way I think they work really well. Now as kit bashes go, this one was a little bit easier because the arms gripping the poleaxe are actually one piece, so this went together fairly quickly. So these arms from Perry Miniatures come from the War of the Roses infantry box, and I will be gluing those to a Warlord body from their starter set. And some arms fit better than others. These aren't perfect, so once the figure is dry, I will get in with a tiny bit of green stuff or maybe a little more plastic glue and just try and fill those gaps there. Now I'm going to stick a Perry head to this body and some feathers from the Warlord starter army. And again, I think this head is probably War of the Roses. I'm not entirely sure, but it does have a nice Empire look about it. And then I want the feathers on this side. Get the big one on first if I can. Might be enough glue for that smaller one as well. No. Just get the scalpel blade in and nurse those into position. quite like that. And as I said, when that model is dry, I will tidy up the gaps in the shoulders. See how we go. We might be lucky. Bit of pressure on there, that might just stick. And this build that I've done here is basically the body from a Perry mercenary with the arms and heads from the Warlord starter army. And also in my bits box, I've had some arms left over like these from the Perry Agincourt French Army box. And I've been using these to create more proxy Empire models or landsknechts with polearm or a two-handed axe. Who knows? But it does add a little bit of variety to a unit. On this one, I'm just going to add a head that's left over from my Empire State troops. Because I just wanted to show you how the Warlord body with the Perry miniatures arms looks when you place an Empire head, which is obviously heroic scale. It's a little bit weird looking, tends to give the body more the proportions of a teenage boy rather than a grown man. So it may not be something that I do, but if you don't mind a bit of variation and you're looking to fill out the middle or the back ranks of your Empire army, then I think this is one way you can do it. Perhaps a few unit fillers, and the rear ranks could be made up of slightly cheaper plastic miniatures that have been kitbashed to include things like Games Workshop Empire heads. All that's left to do now is just show you a few Empire handgunners that I built, again using different heads. So here, straight out of the box, is an Empire handgunner. This next one, as you can see, has a slightly smaller head, and that is from the Warlord starter army. I think it works, and I would be quite happy to sprinkle some of those into my Empire Old World army, because I think it will add a bit of variety, a little bit of character, and you can get away with it. And lastly, particularly if anyone's interested in converting their empire into Estalia, I've got a Conquistador cavalry head there with an Empire feather glued to it. And I think that looks quite respectable. It gives a slightly different flavour, and as I said, might be of interest to some of you people if you are actually wanting to make an Empire army that Games Workshop don't produce the miniatures for. Before I take the camera off the tripod as well, I just wanted to compare this Empire handgunners model, which I haven't put on a base yet, with a very old miniature that I built quite some time ago from the Frostgrave range of miniatures. Size wise, I think they're very comparable. They look good together, maybe better suited for a mercenary unit such as the Free Company of Militia, and I'll be looking at that in my next video. Here's another Frostgrave miniature. I think this is either a barbarian or a Northman or something, and again I built this quite some time ago, and you can see that the proportions when compared to Games Workshop Warhammer miniature, actually quite good. Before we break open the Foundry blisters, here's the talisman miniature that I showed you earlier, which might make quite a nice character or musician. And that bard is shown here compared to pikemen using Perry miniatures, body and arms, and the head of a Wargames Atlantic Conquistador, and the Landsknechts from Warlord Games. We'll go with that guy there. Okay, so to finish up with, we'll just do a line-up scale comparison, and on the left there we have an Empire handgunner with a Wargames Atlantic Conquistador head, very bravely aiming his shot at an old Marauder Ogre. And I've just included this so that you can see how it compares to some of the historical miniatures. And we've got a Perry body and mercenary pikeman with a Conquistador head again, and some feathers from Warlord adorning that model. Bright silvery Wargames Foundry, Renaissance mercenary. In the middle is the Spearman that I converted from the Warlord Starter Army box set. And again, in between that and another handgunner from Warhammer Games Workshop, we've got a Foundry miniature, just to kind of show comparisons of scale. And finally, the handgunner with a GW Empire head is aiming his weapon at an old Marauder Ogre. Now, I do know that Wargames Atlantic do some Landsknecht ogres or Renaissance ogres, and they look like lovely models, even though I haven't been able to pick up a box yet. I wouldn't mind getting hold of a box now, but the other reason why I haven't rushed out to get some is because that I sculpted some ogres of my own in a very kind of old school style. I think I did about 6 different ogres. Here are 3 of them. They're still available from the Battleforge website. So if something like this appeals to you, you can still pick them up, either in resin or in metal, I believe. Now, I will be painting some of these in a future video as I build my Empire army. But just before we finish off, I wanted to do a scale comparison between my ogres and an Empire handgunner. And this is how they size up with the Marauder Ogres as well. But that's something for a future video. So whether you're creating a historical army and you just want to add a little bit of variety, or whether you're kitbashing your own proxy Empire army, I hope you have found this video useful. Please smash that like button if you have. Also, please feel free to comment on any of the projects you might be working on, or anything that you found interesting, or any hints and tips that you have that you think might be useful to me. It's always great to hear from you. If you do leave a comment, please keep it positive, kind and polite. In my next video, I will be looking at Free Company Militia, some more Foundry models, and kitbashing with some Ghost Archipelago crewmen. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Landsknecht, 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 Landsknecht.